I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the envelope. It was sitting on the small hallway table, like it had always belonged there, between a ceramic bowl for keys and a framed family photo that Eleanor always insisted be perfectly centered. Eleanor Price, my mother in law. She had a talent for making everything look ordinary while controlling every detail underneath it. We arrived for Sunday dinner exactly at 6 p.m., just like every other week for the past 8 years. My husband Andrew kissed her cheek without hesitation. Our son ran straight into the kitchen, chasing the smell of roasted chicken and herbs. His father followed, talking about traffic like nothing in the world had changed, but I saw the envelope first and I didn't ask what it was because I already knew. I'm a forensic accountant, which basically means I don't look at what people say. I look at what they do when they think nobody's watching. Patterns are everything. And Eleanor Price had been building a pattern for years. She never accused me directly, and that would have been too obvious. Instead, she worked in suggestions. Small ones, carefully placed. Funny how he doesn't really look like the Prices. Are you sure there's no mixed ancestry in your family? Children can surprise you, can't they? Always said with a smile. Always in front of others. That's what made it dangerous. Because nobody can call out a smile. When my son Noah was born, I thought nothing of it. He had lighter hair than expected, greenish eyes that didn't match mine or Andrew's exactly. But my grandmother had the same eyes. Genetics isn't a straight line, and it's a web. Eleanor, however, didn't see a web. She saw a question mark. The first time she hinted at it was during Easter dinner. She was holding Noah on her lap, tilting his head slightly as she studied him. Then she said casually, "Strange. He doesn't really take after the Price side at all, does he?" Nobody responded, because comments like that are designed not to be answered. They are designed to hang in the air. By the time Noah turned 2, I started writing things down. Not because I was emotional, because I was tracking behavior, dates, comments, situations, witnesses, and a pattern was forming, and I didn't like what it was starting to look like. Then came the call, 3 weeks ago, from a genetics lab I'd never heard of. "Mrs. Carter, this is regarding a DNA sample submitted for your child Noah. We need to confirm parental consent before processing." I remember standing in my office, completely still. "Submitted by Eleanor Price." Yeah, at her address, without telling anyone, without asking. I told them to cancel it immediately. My voice didn't even shake, but something inside me shifted, because this was no longer just passive comments. This was action. And that night, I called my attorney. Not my husband, not Eleanor. My attorney. She listened quietly, then said one thing. "Do nothing. Let her finish whatever she thinks she's doing." Then she added, "And make sure there are witnesses when it happens." That's when I understood this was never about truth. It was about performance. And Eleanor Price had planned a performance for Sunday dinner, which is why the envelope was already on the table, waiting, like a final scene set before the curtain rises. And I'd already decided something very important. I was going to let her open it first. Eleanor didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed as she stepped into the dining room. She never rushed anything that mattered to her. The envelope stayed on the hallway table for almost an hour before dinner, just sitting there, silently collecting attention without demanding it. Andrew hadn't noticed it yet. Or maybe he had, and just hadn't assigned meaning to it. That's the thing about trust. It blinds people in very specific ways. Dinner started like every other Sunday. Plates were placed in the same order, water glasses filled halfway, because Eleanor believed full glasses were messy. The same background noise of a football game playing low from the living room. Everything carefully ordinary, and then Eleanor stood up. "I think," she said softly, "there's something we should go over as a family." No one reacted immediately, because she never announced things like this. She introduced them like a teacher preparing a lesson. She walked to the hallway, picked up the envelope, and placed it directly in front of Andrew. That's when I saw his face change. Not confusion, recognition, not of the contents, but of intention. You did it, I said quietly. Eleanor didn't look at me. I think you should let him read it, she replied, calm, controlled, almost kind. Andrew opened it, slowly, like the paper itself might accuse him of something. Inside were printed lab results, DNA comparison report. I already knew what it would say, because I'd received a call 3 weeks earlier from the same lab. Someone had tried to run a genetic test on my son without consent, and I had shut it down immediately, or at least I thought I had. Andrew read silently. The room became smaller with every second, then he exhaled once, hard, and said, "He's mine." Not a question, not relief, a fact hitting him late. Eleanor nodded slightly, like she had confirmed something she already believed. But she didn't stop there, because that wasn't the point. She reached into the envelope again and pulled out a second sheet. "This," she said, turning slightly toward the table, "is the part I think you should all see." I already knew what was coming before she even unfolded it, because I had seen enough patterns to recognize escalation. Andrew took it. His eyes scanned the page, and then stopped, completely. His voice dropped. "This says, half-sibling match." Silence. Not normal silence, the kind that changes temperature in a room. Eleanor finally looked at me, not angry, not emotional, curious, like she was waiting for a reaction she had already rehearsed. I didn't give her one. Instead I said, "You should probably read the name again." Andrew looked down, slower this time, more carefully, and I watched the exact moment his certainty broke apart. Because the report didn't just suggest ancestry, it suggested connection to someone in his own family tree that no one had ever talked about. No, a person he didn't know existed. And that was the moment Eleanor's control slipped. Just slightly. A blink too slow, a breath too sharp, the first crack in a plan she had been building for months. "You see," she said, too quickly. I just wanted clarity. But her voice had changed, less composed now, more defensive. Andrew looked at her, really looked at her for the first time that night and said, "You went behind our backs." Not loud, worse, certain. And in that second, I realized something very important. Eleanor didn't expect me to survive this moment intact. She expected collapse, accusation, chaos. But instead, I was still calm, and that made her uncomfortable because I wasn't reacting like a guilty person. I was reacting like someone who had already prepared for this conversation long before it happened. And that's when she said it, the sentence that changed everything. "I think we need to talk about where he really comes from." For a few seconds, nobody moved. The sentence Eleanor had just said stayed in the air. "I think we need to talk about where he really comes from." Everyone at the table heard the accusation hidden inside those words. Everyone except Eleanor. And she still believed she was in control. That was the strange thing about her. She was so focused on exposing someone else that she never considered what might be exposed about her. Andrew looked down at the DNA report again, then back at his mother. "Where he comes from?" he repeated. His voice was quieter now. "What exactly are you saying?" Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time that evening, she didn't have a prepared answer. I watched her carefully, the woman who always had a response, the woman who could turn every conversation into a lesson, the woman who could make herself look innocent while planting doubt in everyone else. She was suddenly searching for words, and that told me everything. "Mom?" Andrew said. He rarely called her that when he was serious. Usually it was casual and warm, but now it sounded different. What did you actually do?" Eleanor sat down, slowly. Her hands moved toward the necklace she always wore. I had noticed she touched it whenever she was uncomfortable. A small habit, a nervous signal, a crack in the perfect image. "I only wanted to know the truth," she said. Nobody answered because everyone understood the problem. She had been chasing the truth while hiding something herself. Andrew looked at me. How long have you known about this? The question wasn't angry. It was hurt, and that was worse, because he wasn't asking if I'd betrayed him. He was asking why he was the last person to know. 3 weeks, I said. His expression changed. 3 weeks? I nodded. When the lab called me? The room went completely silent. You knew? He asked. Yes. And you didn't tell me? I looked at Eleanor, then back at him. I wanted you to see this happen yourself. Eleanor immediately reacted. She manipulated the situation. The irony was almost impossible to ignore. The woman who secretly ordered a DNA test was accusing me of manipulation. But before I could respond, someone else spoke. A voice from the end of the table. Andrew's aunt, Margaret, the quietest person in the room. The person who almost never interrupted anyone. Stop, Eleanor. Everyone turned because Margaret never challenged her sister. Not publicly, not ever. Eleanor stared at her. What? Margaret looked down at the papers, then at Andrew, then at me. I think there are things you need to know. Eleanor's face changed instantly. Not fear, something deeper. Panic, real panic. Margaret, don't. 2 words, but they were enough. Because they confirmed something, there was a secret, a much older one. Andrew stood up slightly. What are you talking about? Margaret took a deep breath. I'm talking about the person whose DNA matched Noah. Nobody spoke. She continued. His name is Lucas Bennett. Andrew frowned. I don't know anyone named Lucas. I know. Margaret's voice became softer. Because Eleanor never told you. The room felt frozen. Lucas was born before you, Margaret said. Andrew stared. Before me? She nodded. Before your father and Eleanor got married. Eleanor's face went pale. Margaret, please. But it was too late. The story had already started coming out. 32 years ago, Margaret continued, Eleanor had a child. Andrew didn't blink. He looked like he physically couldn't process the sentence. My mother had another child. Nobody answered, because everyone already knew, everyone except him. And suddenly everything made sense. The DNA test, the obsession with genetics, the need to prove something was wrong with my son. It wasn't because Eleanor loved the truth. It was because she was terrified of it. You gave him away? Andrew whispered. Eleanor finally broke. I was young. Her voice cracked. I was scared. Andrew laughed once, not because it was funny, because it hurt. You spent years questioning whether my son was mine. He looked at the papers. While you had your own child, you never told me about? Eleanor had no answer, and that was the moment I realized. She didn't destroy my family. She opened a door she had spent decades trying to keep locked. Nobody touched the food after that. The plates were still on the table, the candles were still burning, and the same quiet music was playing in the background. But the dinner was over. Not officially. Nobody announced it. Nobody stood up. It just ended, because some moments don't need a goodbye. They just leave everyone sitting there, trying to understand what happened. Andrew was still standing, looking at his mother like he was seeing her for the first time. I have a brother. His voice was almost a whisper. Eleanor looked down. Yes. A single word, a word that changed his entire life. Does Dad know? That question hit harder than anything else, because everyone understood what it meant. Andrew wasn't only thinking about himself. He was thinking about all the years his family had lived inside a lie. Eleanor didn't answer. And that was an answer. Margaret covered her face with one hand. I told you this would happen one day. Eleanor looked at her angrily. You promised. The room went quiet again. You promised you wouldn't say anything. Andrew turned toward Margaret. You knew. Margaret didn't deny it. Yes. How long? Her silence was enough. Your whole life? Margaret nodded. That was the moment Andrew finally broke, not loudly, not dramatically. He just sat back down, like someone had removed the ground underneath him. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold mine either. Not because he was angry, because his entire understanding of his family was collapsing. A few minutes later, Eleanor tried to explain. She talked about being young, about being afraid, about not knowing how to handle a child before marriage, about wanting a fresh start. Every sentence sounded like an explanation, but none of them sounded like an excuse. Then Andrew asked the question nobody wanted to answer. Where is he now? Eleanor looked confused. What? The boy you gave away. A pause. Where is he? She looked at Margaret, and that told us everything. Margaret knew. His name is Lucas Bennett, she said. He lives in Colorado. Andrew immediately grabbed his phone. What are you doing? I'm finding my brother. Eleanor stood up. No. Everyone looked at her. No? Andrew turned. You don't get to decide that anymore. That sentence changed something, because for the first time, Eleanor wasn't the person controlling the room. She was just a mother who had run out of ways to control the damage. The next few days were strange. Andrew barely slept. He searched old records, looked through documents, tried to understand how someone could exist for 32 years without him knowing. Lucas stayed with us for 4 days that somehow felt like the beginning of something and the end of something at the same time. Andrew was fascinated by him, not in a strange way, in the way someone looks at a missing piece of their own life. They compared everything, their childhood habits, their favorite foods, the random things they both did without realizing, the way they laughed when they were nervous, the way they both tapped their fingers against a table while thinking small things, but somehow those small things meant the most. One evening, I found them sitting outside on the porch, just talking. No phones, no distractions, just two brothers trying to make up for 32 years they never had. I should have known something was wrong, Andrew said. Lucas looked at him. With what? With my family. Lucas stayed quiet. Then he said something I don't think Andrew expected. You were a kid too. That was the first time I saw Andrew stop blaming himself, because for weeks he had carried guilt that didn't belong to him. But the hardest conversation was still waiting. Eleanor. She finally agreed to meet Lucas. Not at our house, not at hers, at a small cafe halfway between both places. A neutral location, somewhere nobody could control the environment. I didn't go. Andrew didn't want an audience. He needed that conversation to belong to him and his mother. Later that evening, he came home, and I knew immediately how it went, because he looked exhausted. Not angry, just tired. She apologized, he said. I waited, and he sat down. She said she thought giving him up was the only option. A pause, but she also admitted something else. I looked at him. What? She said she was never afraid of the past. He looked down. She was afraid the past would prove she wasn't the person she pretended to be. And that explained everything. The perfect house, the perfect dinners, the perfect family image. Eleanor had spent decades building a version of herself that had no mistakes, no cracks, no secrets, and then a DNA test meant to destroy someone else, open the door to the one thing she tried hardest to erase. A month later, things were different. Not perfect, different. Andrew and Lucas were talking every day. They were building a relationship slowly, not pretending 32 years didn't happen, not forcing something fake, just learning each other. Margaret visited one afternoon. She brought old photographs, pictures of Eleanor when she was younger, pictures nobody had seen, and one photo stopped all of us. A young Eleanor holding baby Lucas, smiling. Not the Eleanor everyone knew, not the controlled, careful woman, just a young mother. Margaret looked at the picture. She loved him. Nobody said anything, because that was the hardest part. The situation wasn't simple. People aren't simple. Someone can love you and still hurt you. Someone can make a terrible choice and spend years running from it. As for my son Noah, he was completely unaware of all the drama. He was 4. His biggest concerns were cartoons and whether he could have dessert before dinner. And maybe that was a reminder we all needed. Not every generation has to carry the secrets of the one before it. Eleanor eventually sent me a letter. Not a message, a real handwritten letter. She apologized, not for the DNA test only, for the years of comments, the doubts, the little ways she tried to make me feel like I didn't belong. I didn't forgive her immediately. I don't think forgiveness works like that. But I understood something. The DNA test she ordered to prove I was lying didn't expose my secret. It exposed hers. Years later, I still remember that envelope on the table, the way it sat there, waiting. Eleanor thought she was bringing evidence against me. She thought she was about to reveal something hidden. She was right. Something hidden was about to come out. Just not what she expected. Sometimes people spend so much time searching for proof that someone else is wrong. They forget the truth might be waiting for them.